actually put a couple of links in the chat right now while I'm thinking of it. So there's a couple of links, and one of those links in the chat is where you can find out more information about some of our upcoming workshops. And the second link is our YouTube channel, so you can go on there and see a whole bunch of different videos, the webinars like this, and then some training items for planning and zoning boards. You can watch our commission board meetings that we put up on our YouTube, lots of viewing. So it is 7 o'clock, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining in today's webinar titled Gould's Logging on Moose River Plains in the Early 1900s. My name is Katie Malinowski, and I'm the Executive Director at the Tug Hill Commission, and I am your host for our first historical webinar of this fall. For those of you who may not know, the Tug Hill region covers 2,100 square miles in portions of Jefferson, Lewis, Oneida, and Oswego counties. The Commission is a small, non-regulatory state agency that provides technical assistance in land use planning, community and economic development, and natural resource management. Most recently, we've been partnering with other organizations and individuals to highlight history on Tug Hill. If you haven't had the chance, I highly recommend visiting the Commission's YouTube channel to watch the other webinars we've helped sponsor, including a series about the Underground Railroad, Constable Chronicles, and Letters from a Tug Hill Logger. And we have some additional webinars coming up this fall, including one focused on agriculture in Lewis County, and a couple more from the constables, one about Anna Constable, the suffragette, and William Constable Sr., the purchaser. Also, if you have suggestions for future historical webinars, please send us a note. We're always looking for ideas. For this webinar, you are muted and your video is off. As questions arise, please add them to the chat and we will get to them during the question and answer period at the end of the night, or perhaps even during the session if it makes sense. And now, without any further ado, I'm really happy to introduce tonight's speaker, Lee Portner, and we are in Lee, New York. And I wanted to give a special thank you to Bob Sauer, Tug Hill Sage, who introduced us to Lee and got this going. So I am going to now share my screen with our PowerPoint. And please let me know, hopefully someone can, let me hide this 1 second. Someone can let me know that that's looking all right. And we will give it to Lee. So there you go. And there's it. And you can go ahead and start.
I started out in this adventure on August 17th, 1933, and my father was in the logging business, had a sawmill, and when I was 5 years old, I rode in a Linn tractor, and when I was 14, I was driving a Linn tractor. So I have a thing about Linn tractors, but I've got other material too, but this, I've been very lucky to have gotten into these logging camps of Gould's. I went in to Camp 7 3 times, and I've been into Camp 9 3 times. And most of this equipment they used in these camps, it lays right there where they left it. They left it right there on the ground. So this Gould's was the largest pulp mill in the Northeast here. They had the big mill in Lyons Falls, and they moved from the White Lot on Tug Hill in 1920 to their property. There were 60,000 acres they had in the Adirondacks and the Moose River Plains, and they moved there in 1921 to start logging there. And they were in there for many years. They cut the spruce first, and then they went to the hardwood after that. But I was lucky to find some people that worked there that had these pictures, and they let me copy them. So we'll start this adventure now. This is the Adirondack League Club owns this property now. It's 25 miles in from Forestport to where this Camp Camp 9 was, and it's you go past North Lake, and it's about 25 miles in from Forestport. So this is a map. It shows it where they logged this whole territory. They had 10 camps in here, and the biggest camps were Camp 7 and Camp 9. There was almost 200 and some men in these camps, in the Camp 7 and Camp 9. They had smaller camps in different places, which some of them only had 8 or 10 men in. But this Camp 7, Camp 9 were the biggest camps. This was a map. It shows where their camps were. And 7 was on the other side of the Moose River. They drove these logs down the Moose River, and they logged in here till 1930 in Camp 7. And then they moved over to Camp 9 over in here. There's 9. And 1930, they moved everything over there and started logging in there. This is Lynn Tractor coming to Forestport with supplies. They had oats and hay on this. That's all this tractor did was haul supplies. It took them a day to go into Forestport, a day to load the supplies, and the third day they started back to camp with this. This was a log bridge they made for the roadway to go back to camp. This is empty log sleighs, and to go back to the log landing, they turned the bunks sideways on these sleighs so they could come back through. The go back road was pretty rough, but the main haul road was smooth. They kept it in good shape. But talked to a couple of fellows that used to drive. I talked with them, and they said the go back road was pretty rough to get back across, but the main haul was good. This was an early Lynn tractor, probably about a 1922. They had a driver's shanty down near the camp. The drivers could go in here and warm up if they got cold driving the Lynn's, but they didn't use it too much. They had a stove in there, and that's about all. So, but they did use it to warm up in. This was a water wagon. The sprinkler, they had a big pump in this house right here, and they filled this water wagon with water. And they also had a water wagon on the Lynn tractor. They would ice the roads usually at night, so it would freeze. The roads would freeze, and they had two sprinkler wagons. This is an early Lombard owned by T.C. Williams. He was a jobber. He had 4 of these gas Lombards. They were a lot bigger than Lynn's. They had more power. They had Wisconsin engines in them. And there was no load on the back of the machine, but these tractors would pull more than the Lynn would pull. And they had 4 of these on Gould's job working in there. And this was one of the jobbers that worked in there. This is back at where the water tanks filled up, and the foundation for this building is still there. There's some big spruce logs laying in the foundation. They're still there. This is icing the main haul roads. This is a gas Lombard hauling this load. It had a massive Wisconsin engine in here. It was a 4-cylinder, but it was 120 horse. And but these were all loaded sleighs. They were going to the Moose River. This tractor would pull about 18 of these sleighs loaded with logs. Now this is Camp 7 in 1929. This was the finish of it. It was very cold this morning. It looks like about 30 below zero. This was a tractor garage. They had heat in there. This was the other tractor shed. Over here was horse stables. Horse stables were here. This was a warm-up camp for the tractor drivers, which the roof had fallen in on it. They were just about ready to leave this camp in here. The mountain up and back, they had it pretty well thinned out of spruce. Had that pretty well cut off. There wasn't much left there. And they were getting ready to leave this camp. Here's a sprinkler wagon they had up on skids here. Here's this Lynn is headed uphill toward the Moose River with the loaded sleighs. They probably had about 10 or 12 sleighs of logs on here. They had about 10 tons of the sleigh. So you had 100 ton of logs. 10 sleighs is 100 ton. These tractors would haul. They had 60 horse engines in them, Waukeshaws. Now this is, I think, is Cutter Todd. His father was main boss for the camps. They dumped a load of logs off the sleighs, but he has a big grin on his face. So I guess he's happy about it. But once in a while, they dump a load off the sleighs. They had more trouble when they had the horses had to draw these sleighs out to the main hall so the limbs could hook on, and sometimes the logs would come loose and kill the horses. So that's when they got the limbs in there. That's the tote tractor. He's coming back from Forestport. He's got oats on the tractor. He's got bales of hay here, and we got more hay here. And they brought supplies into Forestport by railroad, and they'd go out and they'd load off the railroad cars onto the Lynn, and he'd make usually 2 trips a week. He'd take a day out, a day to load supplies, and a day to get back into camp. The Lynn only went about 3 to 4 miles an hour, and it was 25 miles back to camp one way. This is a view of Camp 7, the tractor sheds on the right, blacksmith shop in the middle, loaded sleighs on the way to the Moose River. Over here, they're going to Moose River. The trail went down through here. The camp was up on the hill, the office up on the hill. These are the sleighs here. They had these all, each tractor, they had 12 Lynn tractors in there. And each tractor had a set of 30 sleighs. And it was $5,000 for the tractor, and it was $5,000 for the set of sleighs. And each time they went out with the loaded sleighs and they come back from the Moose River was over in here. They'd come back, they'd have to drop these unloaded sleighs off to the blacksmith shop. Blacksmiths would have to check them for breakage, and anything that was broke, they had to bring them out and fix them. And then they'd hook on and they'd go back to the woods with them. This was, each tractor had its own doorway here, and they kept those tractors. There was steam heat in there, and they heated that garage.
I don't know. Keep going. Not sure what happened. There we go.
Okay, this was the gas station at Camp 7. This was, I think the blacksmith shop was over here. They had, this was a main haul road right through here. The tractors would stop here and fill up with fuel. And I don't know what this, I think this was a men's camp back in here. And this was a blacksmith shop over here, I think too. But the main gas pump was right here where they filled up with gas. This is a very early Lynn. It had a fifth wheel back here. It didn't work out. It would buckle up, and the logs would buckle around, and they had a big problem with it. So they did away with this, and they just went back to using the sleighs here. And this had a spring pole binder on it for a tensioner on your chains. They run that pole through the front chain, you take a twist in it and go back here and put it under the back chain, and it tightened the load on its Lynn. This was a real early, this was a 1918 Lynn. This is about the first Lynn tractor they ever made. It had a chain steerage under here to steer the front, and an open seat cab on it. The guy must have got lots of fresh air. He had good air conditioning on it. So, this fifth wheel deal didn't work out good on it, so they quit using it. There was a sprinkler wagon. This was pulled by horses. They had horses on this one. And here you can see the water coming out the spouts on the back. They were icing the roads. By springtime, this main haul road would have 2 to 3 foot of ice in it for the thickness of it. And they'd usually sprinkle this at night, so it would freeze right down then. But this here, they're using horses on this one on the sprinkler wagon. There.
Right there. So there you go.
Just a later one. This was back in the early 40s. It's towing this one into the International Cat. They had a stove in the middle to keep the water from freezing. They had a fire going in a wood stove to keep the water from freezing in the sprinkler wagon. And I guess they must have had trouble earlier with the water freezing in there because it was so cold back in there that somebody got the bright idea of putting a wood stove in there. So, but this is later. This is maybe in the early 40s. I think this is an international crawler. Now this really early horse-drawn plow. This was horses pulled this. It had about 2 teams of horses on the front of this, and it had adjustable wings. Most of it was made out of wood. I found these 2 front pieces I brought home from up there. They were laying in the junk pile, and you could adjust the width here with the handles, and it had wooden wings on it. You could adjust the width of this. But this was a real early, before when they first moved in here, there's log sleighs are here. This must be the horse barn here where the horses were. This looks like a pair of snowshoes laying there. When the got them real emergency, they could put snowshoes on. This is Camp 7. This is kind of when it ended up. This is a tractor barn. This is, I think, the blacksmith shop. Here we got empty sleighs laying here. There's a single horse. He's kind of wondering what's going to happen, I guess. And some of these buildings had started. This was the main tractor barn. I think this was the men's bunkhouse over in here. This is the main haul road from back in the woods to the Moose River Plains, or the Moose River, where they dumped the logs. This was earlier in the winter. I think it was in the spring. There's they'd put the water wagon up on timbers, and here they had snow rollers. They would hook a couple of teams of horses to these wooden snow rollers. They were probably 10 feet in diameter, and they would pack the snow down with these rollers. Instead of plowing it, they just packed it down. And come spring, you had a muddy mess, but that's the way they did it then. So this was a tractor barn. There's your snow plows or rudders, two sets of them. They laid right there when I was into there in '87. They laid right there where they are there in the picture, and they rutted the main haul road. You got the snow roller back here. This is the main tractor barn they had for the Lens. Yeah. This is a lineup of the sleighs, the empties, just the way those sleighs laid right there when I was in there, just the way they are right there, just as they unhooked them from the tractor. They laid right in rows. There was probably, there must have been 100 or so sleighs right left right there. There was the wood had all rotted off of them. The irons were there, the sleigh irons were there, and the bunks, the wooden bunks, was rotted off. There wasn't a single piece of the log chain that I could find. I thought probably during the Second World War, they must have went in there and they took all the log chain out, sold it for scrap. But I couldn't find a piece of log chain in there. But these sleighs laid right there in rows where they unhooked them from the tractor. This is the blacksmith shop. He's working on some sleighs there. That was heated. He had the heat in there. You can see the icicles on the roof. And he had to check every one of those sleighs when they went back after they unloaded on the river. They had to drop the sleighs off to the blacksmith, and he had to check every sleigh and make sure there was no breakage on them. So it kept him very busy. This is another one, heated garage. Now, these were, I think, folding doors they had on there, but they burnt all these buildings when the League Club took over the property. These buildings were all gone. But the first tractors they took in there, they had 8, I think, Lens in 1920. And the first ones burned up in the garage. The garage caught on fire and they all burned up. So they had to go and buy some more tractors.
Lee, there's a question in the chat from Phil Williams. How did they get the gasoline back to the camps for the tractors?
They got the gasoline back on they had a big tank. I don't know if it shows here. They had 2 tanks. They were 5,000 gallon tanks, I think. They had skis on them. Okay. And they'd take them out to Forestport and they'd load the fuel in the tanks, kerosene for the bunkhouse and stuff, and their lights and stuff, and the gasoline for the tractors. They put in these tanks and then they drew them back with a len. Okay. And they were on skis. Okay. So they were in the wintertime. They had to go to Forestport to get it. This was inside the bunkhouse, the cookhouse, the tables, and they had this camp had quite a large. They had quite a large bunkhouse in this camp. This is a very early Lynn tractor, probably of 1922. Lynn made these patented bunks. They were a trip bunk, but somehow I guess they didn't work out good for them up in there because they abandoned using them. They didn't use them anymore. This is a blacksmith shop. This men's camp over here where the men's bunkhouse is. And this tractor is real early, and but these patented bunks, they didn't work out, and so they didn't use them anymore. They abandoned using them. But now this root cellar in the office. This, when I was in there in '87, this building was still there. This was still there. Now the root cellar was there. They kept, excuse me, they kept. All their foodstuffs. They had a spring in there that was it kept everything cool. They kept their meat in there, their bacon and potatoes and all. They used a tremendous amount of potatoes and beans and salt pork. And there was a cold spring in there to keep this all this cool in there. And they got a big supply of firewood here for the camp office. And here it was in '87. I was in there. This building was still there. The bottom logs had rotted out on this, and the camp started to settle. So somebody nailed some boards on the side of it to hold it up yet. But the last time I was in there, 2 days later, this camp burnt. Somebody set it on fire, and they burnt. I think they burnt 3 or 4 more buildings in there. they did, Adirondack League did use this club, this building. There was bunks inside of it. They did use it for people fishing and hunting back in there. Here's the inside of the camp. It's a World War I Army stove in there. And they had another stove in there. They had probably, they had about 10 bunks in there. There was an upstairs in there. They had 10 bunks in there, but they had, this was a World War I Army stove that was in there yet. And
So you say the Adirondack League Club owns all that land now?
yes.
Do they still use a lot of those trails for their
Oh, yes.
operation?
Yeah,
Yep, okay.
yes. Okay, this is a bunkhouse. This is a men's camp. In here, this was the men stayed in one end of this camp, and the cook was in the other end. This was the cook part in here where the cook, they ate their meals. This is a Model T snowmobile that Mr. Gould had, Gordon Gould. He'd check on the camps every once in a while. He'd go back in, and he had this Model T snowmobile he used to get back in there. And that's how he got around in the camp. But this was, it looks like they had some kind of tar paper or something on the side of this building that was here. But the men slept in this camp, this men's camp here.
How many men were in the crew?
They probably had, in this camp here, I think at one time they had 150, 200 men in there. This was the biggest camp they had. This is a tractor shed here. Each numbered for each tractor had their own spot to go in. These sleighs lay right here. Here's the office over on the hill. And these are just as they unhooked from the tractor. These sleighs lay right there. Up here is pretty well cut off up on the mountain. They've got the spruce pretty well whipped up there. It's getting pretty sparse. The Moose River lays down over in here. This main haul road went down over through here and went down over the hill to the Moose River. Moose River's down in here. There. This is summertime camp 7. They had a few people stay in there in the summer to keep track of the camp and like caretakers. And here they were feeding the deer. I imagine toward fall these deer might have went in the frying pan. I don't know, but this was a blacksmith shop here. But they had 4 or 5 people that stayed back in the camp to. This was a scoot here they had on skis, probably a tote, something for toting. But the cook would feed the deer, and I imagine they had some venison in the fall. I don't know. There's the fuel tanks. One was for kerosene and one gasoline, and there was a pump in here. They'd haul these out. These were on skis. And they'd haul these out to Forestport, and they'd load them with fuel, and then draw them back into the woods. And that's I don't know. These tanks are still laying there. They're still back in there. This tank here, they cut the ends out and made a culvert out of it for a bridge. But of course, the pumps are all the gas pumps are all gone. Now there's no gas pumps here, but these tanks are still there. They're still back in the woods. They're going through Camp 7 on the way to the Moose River. There's loaded sleighs. You got probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You got about 80 ton of logs there. And here's the empties they dropped off the blacksmith shops over here. They dropped these off for the blacksmiths to check. And this one here, here's the water wagon sitting over here. He's going to the Moose River with the load. This looks like an early Lynn here. Now this is 1929 on the Moose River. It thawed that year, and these logs started moving in the river. And Mr. Gould come in there and looked at it, and he says, "If this happens, I'm ruined." He says, "That's going to ruin me, because he's going to lose all these logs." But I guess it froze up again, and they must have had quite a job of getting these logs back together again. But they had them in piles in the river, but it had thawed and it started moving these logs down the river, and they weren't ready for them yet. So, but I guess they must have, it froze up again, so it avoided a big disaster for them. Now here we are on the log landing on the Moose River. These are all logs in rows piled right in the river. They're in the river. They up here, you can see they're putting fresh logs in, and every so many feet, they'd make a road across. Here's a road here going across. These Lins would drive across this road, and they'd dump either side of this. They'd make a bridge across of logs. And here's another one down here. This is another road. They'd go across, they unload their logs in the river, and then they'd go back on the go-back trail to back up back to the woods. There's the same place in 87, same location. This water is about 4 foot deep here, and they would come in from this side, and they'd go across the log bridge, and they'd go over here, and they'd turn around, and they'd come down here, and there was another bridge going across. They'd come back here. When I was in here in 87, on this side of the river, there was bear scat all over the place in there. The bears had been digging everything in this landing here was dug up with the bears. They were looking for grubs. Okay. There was bears all over the place in there. Now here's another shot of the landing. These they got looks like a guy up here. These logs were probably 20 feet deep in places there on the river. And they were piled up, and these here hadn't been in here too long because it hadn't snowed on them much yet, so they weren't there too long. But you can see up here the mountain was getting pretty well sparse. They cleaned it pretty good with the timber. The spruce was pretty well gone on there. There's another shot. Here they're going across way up here with a load. Lynn's going across with 6 sleighs or 60-ton of log. They're dumping them in there. And they go across and they turn around over here, and then they'd come back up this road here, go back to woods. There's another one coming down onto the river with loaded sleighs. And they're getting ready to go across the wood bridge. This we walked from the camp down to where this was probably 3/4 of a mile down to the river from where the camp was. And some of this road down there, we walked it in the summertime, and it was pretty rough. So it had to have about 3-4 feet of snow and ice on it to cover up the boulders. There he's loading water in from the water tower. He was loading the water wagon up. Now he had a load of logs he was towing behind this one, but he was this was an early tractor. It was probably 1922 tractor. They had a big pump in this pump house, and the steel tank was still in there. It was all made out of spruce logs, And they'd fill this big water tank, and then they'd dump it in the water wagons, and they'd ice the road with them. So now here's Mr. Gould. This is brand new 1929 Model A snowmobile. He's pretty proud of that machine. It's a 29 Model A, brand new. He just bought this. He went from Model Ts to Model A's, and they were getting ready then to move on the other side of the river. 1930, they moved over on the other side to Moose River, and he drove back in to check on the boys back there, see how they were coming, and looks like he had a motorhome on the back.
A lot different from today's snowmobiles.
Probably if he had trouble, he could sleep overnight in there, but might have been kind of cool. I don't know, but that was his brand new Model A snowmobile. There he is here. They're moving camp from 7 to 9 across the Moose River. He's following me here with his Model A snowmobile. They put the whole camp on these sleighs, all the cooking utensils, the men's camp. This is a later model Lynn. This was probably a 6-cylinder Lynn, 100-horse tractor. They had everything they needed for the camp. They left the buildings back on 7. They never did anything. They just left them there. And they must have left a lot of sleighs there too. Some sleighs. There was some sleighs there, but they took a lot of sleighs with them. And they moved the whole camp over across the river and set up maybe Camp 9 over there. So here they are, dumping logs on the ice. They had tractors coming across. They dumped logs both sides. They filled a river right full of these logs. There was all peel spruce. It was peel spruce. This is an early tractor, about a 1921, 22 tractor. You had probably 8. They could haul about 4-cylinder, 60 horse. They could haul about eight sleighs. That's 80 ton of logs they could haul. There they're on the go back. They tilted the bunks sideways on them and pulled them back on the go back road, which wasn't very good. The road was pretty rough. The guy says you didn't put your hands down between the steering wheel because you'd break your arm if it caught on a rock or something. You'd have a busted arm. Okay, this was in the 30s. They're loading by hand on a sleigh there, and they got looked like they got a D6 cat hooked to that, so that's probably mid-30s. And they're loading it by hand. No hydraulic loaders back then. You had manpower. It's a pretty good sized stick of timber there. There they are, cold deck loading from the cold deck onto the sleighs. These sleighs had 10-foot bunks on them. They were 10 foot wide, and they'd load these. They had this was loading this sleigh. They had horses hooked to this sleigh. These horses would tow this sleigh out to the main haul road and make the train up for the Lynn. The Lynn didn't go back in and get single sleighs. They kept the Lynn out on the main haul road. And they loaded these other sleighs by horses. They had about 200 horses in this camp at one time. And they loaded all this by hand. This was off a coal deck. This was a deck that was they had in the woods. They drew these out. They drew these out and hooked on the main haul road. This is a Sand Hill man. He had hot sand in there. He kept a fire going in the sand. And when these tractors would come on a hill, he'd have to take this hot sand out there, and he'd spread it in the tracks on the hill, because to keep the sleighs from bunking up and smashing into each other. And he could tell by the sound of the tractor coming about how many sleighs was on that tractor. And he could spread that sand on there. They also use straw. They use straw on them, but the sand, it had to be hot sand to stop the runners from going too fast. I think this man right here was a Sand Hill man. This was one of the Woods bosses here checking on him, I guess. But he could go inside there and kind of keep warm. He had to keep fire going in there, keep the sand hot. And he had a broom setting up here. The broom, he must have used the broom to brush maybe the snow away so he could throw the sand on, you know. So that was his job, is sand in the hills for the tractors. This is a water wagon on a Lynn tractor. It's that's a later model Lynn. That's probably about a 23, 24 Lynn. This guy's got a big grin on his face. He must be happy. But he was out sprinkling the road, I guess. So these water tanks, they could take off the tractor. They could take them off and put them on sleighs or whatever. Now this shot here is ready to hook on. This is 6-cylinder Lynn. He's going back in to hook onto this train of Lynn's. This one's coming back out. This is an old 4-cylinder Lynn. This is early number 1. This is, I think he's coming back with empties, probably. But these guys here are going to take this tractor up here and they're going to hook onto this. He might have had 14, 15 sleighs there. The 6 cylinders, at one time, they had 18 sleighs and 180 ton. And they bunked up on them and they dumped some of them. And Mr. Gould come back in the woods. He says, don't ever try that again. So he wasn't too happy about it. But
I have to speed up a little bit.
this one's coming back with load on it, cut over ground. They cut this pretty heavy in there. There wasn't much left on this. They had it cut pretty heavy. He's coming back with a load from back in farther, and he's on his way to the Moose River. He got this cut over pretty heavy in here. Now, some of the tractor drivers, this guy here was from Lee Center. He lived in Lee Center, and they had 12 of these tractors in there. This is some of the drivers. You drove Lynn tractor. You didn't need too many coats on when you were in the cab, because you'd sweat when it was 20 below zero. There's a horse team. They're bringing the sleighs out to make up the train for the Lynn's. They had some pretty good size. This was all peeled wood. They'd start in May and June, and they'd peel the bark on these. They peel these, and late toward the last, they left the bark on them, and they had a rossing machine in the factory pulp mill, and they'd take the bark off of the rosser. But these early ones, they had to use the spud to take the bark off. These horses are pulling these out to make up the log train. Here's another one. This must be the camp cook. She's checking them out here. This is Lynn number 10. Looking the tractor over. They did have some man and wife team in these camps for cooks that did the cooking. There's another one of 10 going in with a load on. He had seven sleighs on. It's 70. It looks like this back one here, something come loose on it, and kind of disarrayed back there, but most of Gould's tractors, they didn't have no load on the machine, on the tractor. He had boxes on here. They had stones for weight in there for weight. He didn't put logs on the back toward the late. He used them. But there was, this sleigh here probably had 4 to 5 quarts of pulp on it and weighed 10 ton to the sleigh they averaged. There's number 3. This one had the box on it with stones in it for weight. He had a good load on it here. Now this sleigh here, this was at patent stake. They had patent dump stakes on it. And but I don't think it worked out too good for them. They had a big load on this sleigh. Looks like he had about 6 quart of pulp on there. This was the first load with a patent sleigh, but I don't think it worked out too good. So they went back to the old way of doing it. There they're going through camp. That's a men's bunkhouse. Right here is a men's camp. They're going through the main haul road to the Moose River. He had, this was probably an older Lynn. He had at least 6, he had 7 or 8 sleighs, 80 ton of logs. Here's the sleighs coming back. They're checking them at the blacksmith shop. This one's going down to the river. Brought from the skidway. It said they're going down to the Moose to unload on the river. There's number 10 again. They're down on the river. They're taking the spring pole binder off the load so they can get the chains off. They had to be very careful when they got ready to take the chains off these logs, because you can get killed pretty easy when they come off. They had on the back bunk, I've got a set of bunks, sleighs that come from there. They had Lynn tractor leg bolts that went in the legs, and the blacksmith sharpened them, got them hot, and they drove them into the back bunk timber. And that kept the logs from sliding with the ice and snow on them, kept the logs from sliding off till they were ready to roll them into the river. Now this was 1926. Mr. Gould's in checking on the boys. There's his Model T snowmobile. They didn't do too good a job of stacking these logs. He's probably not too happy about this, the way they got these logs messed around in there. And they might have had to get back at them and straighten them out. But he'd go in probably once a week with a snowmobile and check on them in there. This is a 1926, so that's a T Ford. There he is again. There's Model T. This is Mr. Gould right here. They're going in there with the loaded sleighs here, going toward the river. This guy's leaning on the shovel here, so he's either done working or he's got to work. I don't know which, but he would check on him every so often back in the woods. So it looks like he had some side curtains on it here, so he'd keep warm. But that was his main transportation. There they are again, loading logs in the Moose. They probably had maybe 10 feet deep there of logs. They kept till they got even with this crossover road, and then they'd move down and they'd make another road across and fill that in between with logs. There's another dump. They're dumping a load here in here. They had a stick stuck through the ice here, and I would tell them how thick the ice was and how deep the water was, I guess. But it seems so with all those logs on top of the ice, It was squashed down pretty good on the water. You're 20 feet deep here. You're unloading here with unloading. Looks like they dumped a load here that they didn't make it. So they probably got to straighten that deal out somehow. But the most of them, they kept pretty good. They kept pretty straight in there where they dumped them. Now here's another shot. You're coming in here with a load. Guys are unloading here. This is a road going across. They're building a road way up in here for another road to go across. There was thousands of cord of wood in this river by springtime. Thousands of cord. This Joe Gordon, this guy was from Forestport. He had a taxi. He had about 4 or 5 Model Ts and a couple of Model A snowmobiles. This was a Chevy or Dodge, I guess. And he'd go back into camp on the weekends. This is a men's camp right here. He'd go back into camp and he'd give these loggers a ride out to Forestport for the weekend so they could have a little recreation. He charged them $2, $1 out, $1 back. But sometime coming back, they didn't have the dollar. So
imagine that.
they lost everything they had out to Forestport over the weekend. So, but he ran. I think he had 5 or 6 of these taxis, which they were snowmobiles, and he'd take the guys out there for the weekend. Then he'd bring them back Sunday. Now, this is a very important man. He was a camp cook. Lots of times, older loggers, they got where they couldn't work in the woods anymore, they'd cook for him. But this man had a very important job. These big camps, they had breakfast about 6 o'clock, 5:30 in the morning, and then they had a noon lunch they took to them sometimes in the woods. And then they had them. They had 4 meals a day. The big meal was at night usually, and these guys were in bed by 8 o'clock at night because they got up at 5 in the morning or before. And these guys had a helper. Usually had 2 helpers, and they'd make 100 loaves of bread a day, and these guys would eat 12, 14 pancakes for breakfast, and 6 eggs, and about 6, 8 cups of coffee.
A lot of calories.
They ate good. And this guy's got a mouthful right here. So, but these guys, they weren't too young men working in there. This man right here is probably in his 60s, but mostly Polish, Irish, Swedes. And there was a story went along that these guys would look for jobs at different camps. Well, the first thing they do to get to camp, they kept pigs in some of these camps for food to butcher. The logger would go over and look in the pig pen, and if the pigs were fat and good sized, he wouldn't stay because he figured the cook, they weren't eating the food, they were giving it to the pigs. So if he found a place that the pigs were lean and nice shape, he'd stay. So
He was gonna get some good
he
food.
checked the pig pen first.
So they were mostly immigrants, the loggers?
A lot of them were.
Yeah.
Some were Russians, some were Russians, Irish, Poles, Swedes, Norwegian, French, a lot of
Interesting.
Frenchmen.
Yeah.
Now, this was Camp 7 in 87. This was the main haul road then. Everything laid right down in here. The blacksmith shop was right about in here. And the tractor barn was over in here. These sleigh irons laid right here yet when I was in there, right in rows where they left them, just where they unhooked them. And I found a lint under this tree. There was a whole keg of brand new track pads for Lynn tractors, which I confiscated out of there.
Nobody else was using them.
I got permission to go in there from the league club, so I had permission. He says, take whatever you want out of there. I took 3 pickup loads out of there of Lynn parts and sleigh parts, but this was in '87 we were in there. This is driving in the spring on the Moose River. This was high water. They had feeder streams all along the Moose River. And at night, they couldn't drive these logs at night. It was bad enough driving them in the daytime. So at night, they had these feeder dams on these, where these small creeks came onto the river. And they'd drop the gateway down at night, and these feeder streams would fill up with water overnight. And then the next morning, the man would go and he'd lift the gate and let the water out into the Moose River. So it would raise the river high enough to drive the logs in. And they had these feeder streams all along the river where it would run into the Moose River. This is a bateau. They had 3 men to the boat. This was pretty rough water in here. One man would have to hold the boat, and this guy here was the oarsman. These 2 guys here, one would have to pry the logs loose, and sometimes they had to use dynamite, but most of the time they could get them loose with the pick pole, and but it was pretty dangerous work. Here they are out on the river. These guys got caulk shoes on. They're breaking up a jam on the Moose. This was all peeled wood, 13'4", and these guys are breaking up. They're in the bateau. They're in the boat, but it looks like some of them are standing on the logs probably to break them loose. But they jam up, and it caused a lot of problems for these guys. This log's headed down the Moose. It was about 50 miles. These logs had to travel down to Lyons Falls. This whole river is full of logs. But sometimes this drive would last for into the next year, because these logs would pile up on the side of the river. They'd have to come back and clean all these logs up and get them back into the river down to the mill. And they'd have to come back here and get all these logs moving. And they'd jam up on the side of the river. This is all full of logs, or the whole river was full of logs. There's another one. They're in the bateau there. I don't know, I see 1 man here. I don't know what happened to the other 2 guys, but this water's pretty rough here. Pretty rough water. Here's another one. The guy's he's holding the boat for the other guy to break the jam up. Now, these guys are on the logs. Most of these guys were bonded Frenchmen from Canada, or Canadians. They were Frenchmen from Canada. And they had the cork boots on. These logs here weren't peeled, so this must have been later on. They got the bark on them. But the last log drive they had was 47, I think, up to Lyons Falls. The last logs they drove by water. And the insurance got so great that they couldn't afford to pay the insurance to have these guys do the river driving. So they went to truck, and they trucked them in after that. But most of these guys were Frenchmen from Canada. They were quite the artists with these logs. This is a log pile at Lyons Falls. This is in the 1940s. It was all 4-foot wood here. And that was their log pile. 1950s, I drawed hardwood pulp up there in the 1950s. But they changed over to hardwood then, because the spruce was pretty well whipped. This was the main conveyor that took it into the mill. There's a 3-way bridge here in Lyons Falls. They tore that down. It's gone now. It's It's not there anymore. This is the main plant. That's gone. That's not there anymore. It's we cleaned that all up now. I think there might be one or two buildings left there now. I don't know. I haven't been up there in a while, but they had this looks like the railroad coming in there. This was probably in the 1950s when this was taken. There's the throughway bridge again. This guy's dumping logs right off his log truck right into the river here. The Moose ran into the Black River in Lyons Falls, and the Black flowed north. And the Moose ran into it right here, and they come together in Lyons Falls. There's some rough river. This is just above Lyons Falls. They had a berm made up here to kind of keep the logs from banking up on the bank there. That's pretty rough water there. You'd want some kind of cork boots on to stand in that water. This is at the falls. A lot of water going over there. If you want a real sight, you want to go up there in the springtime to see this water coming over the falls. It's quite a sight. Yeah, right here.
Yep.
This is where the Black runs into the Black. The falls is right over here, down over this pinnacle here. And that's the Black River here. Where it runs into the Black. This is Mr. Williams, Lawton Williams. He's the man in charge of control room at paper company. And he also runs Snow Ridge ski area. And he was kind enough to let me copy a lot of these pictures that I have there. He let me copy them, and he and his wife ran Ski Ridge, but he worked for Gould Paper Company. He was in charge of the control room, controlled all the presses and all that in the factory. This is the grinder room. Lyons Pulp had all overhead belting, line shaft belting in there. This was real early, probably in the 20s when this was taken. This is where they ground the pulp up in this room here. This is a slasher room. That's where the logs come in. They had the saws in his room to cut the logs into lengths. In this building here, that's long gone now too, I guess. Now this is Gould Town. This is above Lyons Falls. This is one of Gould's stores. This is early, probably in 1900's. This car looks like about a 1905, maybe Cadillac. I don't know. It's early car. That was probably Mr. Gould's car. They had planks in front of here to keep your feet out of the mud. And this was above Lyons Falls. He must have had a company store there. And I'd say it's about 1890s, probably somewhere in there. It's maybe 1900. This car is very early. There's another view of Lyons Falls Paper Company, and there's railroad cars coming in. This is, I think that's the Black River there. So all these buildings are gone now. I think pretty much all of them are gone. Here we are below the falls. This in the 1890s. This was the first factory they had. 1890s. They got some people down here watching the water come over the falls. But it's quite a spectacular view if you go up there in the springtime to see this water coming down over. they had this early factory built, and then they tore that down and they built a brick factory in its place there to replace it. But this was about the first factory they had, this building here. There's a shot of it, 2021. This is before they tore the,
No, this is after they tore a lot of it down. This is all still up.
yeah, this there's the water coming over here. This is the Black River here. This flows north.
Yeah.
Flows north. Yeah, they had a big, this was a beater room where they mixed the pulp. In the beater room, this is early picture here, probably in the 1920s. Beater room. Looks like they got some paper here that's sheets of something that's must have come out of the beater or something, but this was all line shaft driven too by line shaft. They mixed the pulp in here. There's one of the paper machines. I think they had 3 of them in there. I think they said one went to China. They sold one to China, and I think they had 3. I'm not quite sure on that, but I know a man that was in the factory there. He's going to take me on a tour through the factory, and he was out hunting or something on a lake up in the Adirondacks. He fell through the ice, and he had to walk a long ways to get out back to civilization. And it was very cold, and he froze his legs, and he passed away. He passed away after that. He didn't make it from it. So he was going to take me through a tour of it, but I never got to go through the factory. This is a 3-way bridge again. There's a pulp pile. That's all 3 or 4 foot wood there, I guess. All that's left now is these piers, the bridge, I guess. There's some of them left. I think they took some out of the river. I don't think they're in a river. They got some on the side that are there yet. There's another one, shows up above the falls coming down into Lions Falls. They had some very, very savage water there. There was pretty rough water. They had a cement berm here, but some of the pulp got up over the top of it and rolled over it. This is outside of the cutter room. The logs went in through here, and they also had an elevator that the logs went in. And this was a mechanism, I think, to raise the gates on the river. I think this was mechanism here was for the river, regulating the water. This is a cutter room. The reason they cut the logs 13'4" was the distance between the saws. They could get four bolts out of a log, and it come out just right if they cut the log 14 or 13'4". So that's the reason they did. But the logs went through here, and then these saws cut them to length. There's another one of this is a wood room. The logs are going up an elevator. They had an elevator here going up. They were caught in here. Then they went out of here, and they went up over the elevator here, the ramp, and they went out on the wood pile, dumped here on the wood pile. But these logs here all come out of the river. They went up into the paper room and where they cut the paper. So this is the top of the dam, the wood elevator. He's up on the top. There.
Now you're gonna show some of your artifacts.
This is artifacts here that came out of Camp 9. This one did. I was in there in 01. We went back in, and they left a lot of this stuff laying right there. This double-bitted axe head was in there. We put a new handle in it. And my nephew went with me. He put a new handle and he gave me this for a Christmas present. So, this is a bark spud. This is a hemlock spud. This was used on hemlock. Spruce spud, they had kind of a upper kind of ridge here you could score the bark with. They were different than a hemlock spud. This is a real old one. This is a grab skipper. This drove the grab into the log. And the point here, you pop the grab out of the log with this end here. There's the log grabs. You drove these. You drove these into the log here with a mallet. When you got out to the landing, you put the pike under this end and you pop this grab out of the log. The sawmill man didn't like these grabs because they made too big a hole in the log. But for pulp, they were all right because you'd grown the log up anyway. So, but these were log grabs. This was the iron nose piece for the sleigh pole. It took me a while to figure what these were. It's a piece of pipe, 6 inches in diameter. And they flattened one end at the blacksmith shop and they put a hole through here. This went in the end of the sleigh pole on the log sleighs where they hooked together. If they had a problem with the sleigh, if it broke or had a dump, they dumped a load or something, they could pull this pin and pull this nose piece off the end of the sleigh pole and pull the sleigh out of the train and get rid of it and go on and work so hard to get the sleigh unhooked from the other sleighs. That's what this was for. It took me a while to figure out what it was, but I guess I finally did. But this was end of the river driver pike pole. This, you could hook this into a log and draw it to you. This had a screw thing on this end here. You could drive it into a log and twist it and turn it. And this would draw the log to you or push it or end or something. This had about a 12-foot handle on it, just screwed into the wood handle. And this had about a 12-foot handle on it, about 2.5 inches thick, made out of hardwood. And this was a pike pole for the river drivers. There's a pair of spike boots. I got these out of Tupper Lake. And they're pretty good shape here. They got the spikes in them here. These loggers used to go out for the weekend and they'd have some pretty good fights. And the river drivers were different crew from the other guys. And they'd get in a big fight and they'd stomp these guys with these boots. And they called it the loggers' pox.
Oh my goodness.
Some of them would get pretty bad shape. And then the next thing you know, they get all done fighting and they go buy each other a beer.
Well,
They were tough men. But they were good men. This is a log scale. This one I got out of Maine. It was wooden, made out of wood. You saw the diameter of the log here. You put this over the diameter, and then it has a sliding scale on it. You'd slide it down here, and it would tell you the length of the log and how many board feet was in it. And they call it a Blodgett scale. And it's quite old. This scale is I bought this up in Maine. They come out of Maine, and they used them quite a lot up there, but it was in pretty good shape. So something I couldn't live without. This is Harvester's Mills up in Redfield, New York. That's your log stamp. They stamped the ends of the logs with this. They sawed hardwood for the International Harvester Company back in the 1800s, and they marked the end of the log so nobody could steal the logs on them. And that's what it was, International Harvester log stamp. And they had a big Corliss steam engine in there, had a 12-foot flywheel on it, and then sawmill, and they run by steam. And they sawed all this hardwood in there, and this log stamp come out of that mill up there. This is a record of log haulage, the early Lynn's North Lake for Gould, season 1920 and 1921. They had each Lynn listed. This was in the office building on the wall. This was, and each Lynn, it was 12 Lynn's. Each Lynn, it's told the number of cords it drew, and how many trips they made in the woods, how many cords, how many loads, and it told how much gasoline they used. Some of them, it averaged about 35 to 36 gallons of gas a day. Of course, gas was about 7-8 cents a gallon back then. So, and then it's got the sprinkler wagon on here. But they had a list of each one of these, how much each Lynn did for 3 months. This was January, February, and March, 1920 and 21 season. And that's my my special friend with me there, my wife of 66 years, and she's been my pride and joy, and we've had a good life together, and she's helped me a lot over the years. And we've got through this adventure together so far. And we thank everybody for watching this show. Thank you, Katie.
Oh, thank you, Lee. I'm gonna escape out of this PowerPoint, stop sharing. I know we've got a lot of questions, and we'll try to get to some of them, but we didn't really want to interrupt too much. I don't know, Jen, you've been probably monitoring them. Do you want to try to flip through some of the questions, or?
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, Paul Weinstein had a few in the chat. Or I'm sorry, in the Q&A. He asks, asking about bathroom breaks after working all morning.
Bathroom breaks? Do they get bathroom breaks after working all
They
morning?
did it in the woods.
Yeah, I figured you would say. Then he also puts
Whenever it was necessary, you went in the woods.
get in the woods. Okay. Way back in the beginning, there was a question about what was laying on the go back road. Were they logs, metal, or some combination? And what was the mode of transportation on the go back road? And are those trails and roads still visible today?
What was the transportation?
Yeah, what did they put down on the go back roads, and what were they running on those?
They didn't do much with the go back roads. They were pretty rough. And they went back with the Lynn with the sleighs, but they turned the bunk sideways, so they weren't 10 foot wide on there. Some of the places were pretty narrow. A lot of big boulders, big stones and boulders. And the guys that drove the Lynn said it was pretty rough going back. And,
Walt, is it Freebell? Freebell says, how many blacksmiths worked per repair shop? And because of the intensity and the importance of the blacksmith's job, did they work extended shifts or maybe even around the clock to get all the repairs and inspections completed?
More about the blacksmiths. Do you know how many they had at the camp? Or
I think in this camp they probably had about at least 4 or 5 in the big camp, because they had a lot of sleighs they had to check over each time. They brought them back through. So they must have had 4 or 5, at least 5 blacksmiths in this. When I was into camp 7, everything laid right there. There was 2 lathes and all the blacksmith stuff. They burnt the building, and everything laid right there where the shop was. And they never took anything out. But these blacksmiths, they were pretty handy men. I'll tell you, they had to do some pretty hard jobs.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Where were most of the loggers? Where'd they come from?
Well, a lot of them come from Boonville, some from Forestport, and some were transits. They just went from camp to camp. They come in from the old country. A lot of them did, and they sent them up here to work in the woods. And when they come across in the boat, they give them a job in the woods. They made $1 a day, and their board and their feed. And the tractor drivers got $3 a day. Teamsters, Gould had his own teams, and also you could hire out with your own team to work. They got $3 a day if you had your own team and your meals.
Gotcha. And when did the logging stop and why?
When did they stop logging up there?
They're still logging in there.
Yeah.
They're still logging. Gould stopped in probably late 60s, maybe late 60s, I think. They logged the hardwood after they logged the spruce. And they also had the mill at McKeever. Goulds were involved in that too, in the mill in McKeever. But they're still the League Club's still logging in there. They're still logging in there.
Just not the same way. Yeah.
Only it's all modern machinery now, but the Koenig brothers and Joe Karatz, he logged in there late, and
So you have some interesting people on the webinar. I see. I'm looking through these comments, and we've got some Gould family people here tonight. We've got someone whose great grandmother was a cook at one of the lumberjack camps in and around Tupper Lake. She says she remarked about how beautiful the horses were in the fall and worked to death in the spring. So those horses worked pretty hard all winter long.
my parents were cooks in Camp Osceola.
Yep. Betty Stewart.
Was they cook?
Paul is also Paul is asking about the National Geographic map behind you. Do those trails correspond to the roads that they were used then? Or is that nothing to do with the talk tonight?
Well, I asked him the question, and you said that the roads are still being used up there. Yeah.
They're still using a lot of roads up in there that Gould put in. They're using a lot of roads in there.
Yeah.
I've been back in, let's see, it's been about 7-8 years since I was into 9. And I've been to both camps, and I've been to 10. I've been to Camp 10 and Camp 6. I've been to that. You go up farther in the Moose River Plains, and there's a couple camps they had back in there, and they left the log sleighs lay right side the road. They're laying there yet. The irons are. They just unhooked from them and left them right there. Jack Hogan, yeah, I know him. He worked for Gould's. In fact, I think I got a picture of Jack with a Lynn tractor somewhere. I got a picture.
Leona was asking about the danger of the train getting loose and going downhill, but you were talking about the Sandhill man for that very reason.
They did dump some once in a while. The most dangerous was when the horses drawed the sleigh out for the main haul. These logs would sometimes break loose on the sleigh and they'd come over the top. I know I talked with a few guys. They had to jump off the logs, and the logs come right over, and they killed a team of horses that was hauling them.
Oh dear.
And they didn't have no Sandhill man back in. He was just for the Lynn tractors. The Sandhill man was. These other taking them off the coal deck, bringing them out to the main hall. They were on their own there. They had to pick their roads pretty careful. And another thing, when they loaded the sleighs back in the woods, they had to lots of times put straw or hay under the runners. Once they got the load on that sleigh, it would freeze down to the ground, and the horses couldn't move it. And they'd have to sometimes put double team on them to start them, to get them going again. So they used hay back in there when they loaded the sleighs, but they also used hay out on the main haul road, but mostly hot sand they used there
Mhm.
on the main haul. They did lose some sleighs once in a while. They did turn, lots of times a chain would come loose or something, and the logs would break loose off the sleighs and dump, and then they'd have to get the sleigh off the train somehow. And that's what these special ends were made for, so they could get the sleigh loose from the train without too much problem.
Where were the Lynn tractors manufactured? Do you know?
Morris, New York,
Nice.
and they made them. Lynn started out in Maine, and he worked for Lombard in Maine, and Lombard made he made a steam traction log hauler, which I've got friends in Maine now that they've got 2 or 3 of them he's restoring. And he's got 1 or 2 gas Lombards, which was on this show, the gas Lombards. And Lynn worked for Lombard for a while until about 1900. And he had a traveling circus, a dog show and circus. And he went out on the road and he had a single track machine. And he left Maine about 1914, and he took his circus down through the New England states. Well, he got to Morris with his dog show. He had trained dogs and circus animals, and he got to Morris, New York, and they got the polio epidemic, and he got quarantined in Morris. So he stayed there, and he built his first tractor in Morris, and the factory's still there, and some of the buildings are there yet. And we over the years we had 8 Lyns. Right now I'm down to 4, but we used to go down and buy parts down to Morris when the gentleman was running the place there. But Mr. Lynn got killed in 1936 on 4th of July. He had an airplane. He was going to Syracuse to buy a new car, and he took off from Morris, and somehow the pilot swung around and they hit atop of a tree, and the plane crashed, caught on fire, and there was 4 of them. Lynn was in the plane, the pilot, and there's a guy that worked for him and his wife. Well, the guy that worked for him jumped out of the plane before it hit the ground, I guess, or something. But the other 3 got burned up in the plane, and they all died in the plane crash. But yeah, I've messed with Lynn's all my life. I've worked on them in the woods at 30 below zero. We never had much problem with them. We never had much problem with the Lyns. I've got some old records of Gould's, and the most problem they had with their Lyns was drive shafts. Drive shafts used to go out of them. Mr. Gould ordered some parts from Mr. Lynn down to Morris, and Lynn flew them up there with his plane. Well, he miscalculated. He dropped them in the Moose River instead. So he had to get the boat out and go to the Moose River
Retrieve them.
and get the parts out.
You got a shout out from Nick Montalbano, wants to say good seeing your files again. He's one of your
Somebody
fans.
said, nice to see your files, Nick Montalbano.
Good to hear you, Nick. Come down sometime, see me.
There's apparently there's some members of the Gould family watching. They're very interested. Shout out from Albert, your son. Good job, Dad. Great presentation. How often did they move logs down the river to the mill?
Well, it probably sometimes it took them a year to clean up the ones that washed up on the side of the river. Sometimes a guy told me it took them a year to get them out of there, but most of them probably a month, maybe 3 weeks to a month to get most of them down there. But they had to go back up the river and clean up these ones that went on the side of the river that washed over, and they had to, sometimes he said it took them a year to clean them all up. I know I interviewed an old guy, George Shaughnessy, he drove on the Hudson, and they had 4-foot wood on the Hudson. And he said it would take them, sometimes it was a year and a half, 2 years sometimes to get them all cleaned up.
You've got somebody from a Gould a Gould descendant watching from Connecticut who says, Sandra says they have some short film of the tractors from the early 1930s. And I've asked Sandra if she could get those to us or share with a YouTube or something like that. Maybe we could hook you up with that.
Try to find some of these old videos that other people have of the Lynn tractors to get to you.
That sounds real good. Cause I got quite a collection.
So
Right.
we're at 8:30. Are there any other burning questions or should we wrap it up, Jen?
I think there's a lot of kudos. There's one person with their hand up. We want to try to take one more.
Yeah, we could try. Let's see.
Let's see. Christine, if you would like to unmute and ask your question, you can go ahead.
Christine, we're allowing you to unmute. If you can hit your unmute button, you can talk. But we can't do that. Oh, there you go.
There she is.
I think I just hit it
Yep, we can
accidentally,
hear
but
you.
it was a great presentation.
Oh,
Okay. She
Thank
accidentally
you.
raised her hand. Okay.
all right.
Very good.
Daughter-in-law.
Oh, that was your daughter-in-law?
They're down in Tennessee tonight.
Yeah, he's got people from all over the country on here tonight. So,
He didn't think he could watch it, my son said.
well, thank you very much, Lee. This was a really great presentation.
Thank you.
We'll get you a copy of the chat and we'll get this YouTube video out to people on the follow-up email. And thanks again for sharing all your information.
This is history. You'll never see it again. It's history. It's history that everybody should know.
No, you're right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.